Hi all, this is Lasan Zhang, the Democrat killer again. Most people think that our long-term enemy is going to be China. And when I mean long-term, I'm talking about, 30 plus years. And people talk about how, China is a threat to us and how they have this 100-year economic plan and so on and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. The thing about China is that there are two things that we have to be aware of. One is that inside of 5 years of Xi Jin Ping dying, there is a very, very high probability that China will become a democracy. And the consequences of that happening is earth-shattering, if you would. The second part of it is the economy. And while China absolutely will be the largest economy in the world inside of the next probably 20 years or so, maybe 25, they are not going to be the most dominant economy in the world. And I'm going to split this video into probably 2, maybe 3 pieces to explain my position. First, in terms of China's democracy, then its economy, and maybe I'll do a video on what all this means and why I'm making these videos, specifically related to China. So let me delve into the first issue. Why do I think China will be a democracy inside of 5 years of Xi Jinping dying? Well, the simple answer is because South Korea went through the same process. And if you look at the development of China, especially its economy, it's eerily similar to that of South Korea. The way it started, the way it built itself up, and to the point where it's now suffering massive real estate shocks. Guess what? Japan went through the same thing. Korea went through the same thing. China's about 30 years behind South Korea in its economic terms. And what that basically means is that as the Chinese get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, they're going to start to think about not where the next day's meal is going to come from, and they're no longer going to live from hand to mouth. They're going to start thinking about the future because they can, because they have the luxury of time to do so, because they're not going hand to mouth. And in particular, they'll think about what I want for my children, what I want for my grandchildren, what the future holds for us, our country, etc., etc., etc. South Korea, went through the same similar process in the 1980s and early part of the 90s. And it wasn't really until probably about 94, I believe it was, when Korea became a true democracy in terms of the vote, etc., etc., etc. Now, if you look at what happened in South Korea, it's pretty simple. As the wealth grew and students became more aware of the surroundings outside of Korea, they started to rebel and said, this is not right. We shouldn't be oppressed like this politically. We should have some rights, if not all rights, to freedom of speech and the freedom of beliefs. And this became a swan song for the student movement, and they became more and more active until it crescendoed in 2 different steps, essentially. In 1980-something, I forget, early on, in the southwestern city of Gwangju, there was a massive protest, which was brutally beaten down by the junta and the central government. And they did so by using troops from other areas of the country to suppress and brutally suppress that uprising. Now, if that sounds familiar, it should, because it kind of sounds like Tiananmen Square. And I would say, yes, the similarities are remarkable. Then in the late 80s, the student uprising essentially succeeded at the end of President Chun's reign because it received the support of not just the students, but also from their parents, their relatives, and ultimately, and this is the most important factor, the military. This then put Korea into a constitutional crisis, And Chun essentially gave up and said, fine, we'll have elections in 1989. The 89 elections were kind of soft, shall we say. It wasn't truly a democratic election, but in 1994, that's when Korea had its true free elections. Okay, so roll tape forward to China in the 2030s, maybe the 40s. China's already gone through the Tiananmen Square process. We know that. But as income levels rise, the Chinese people are going to start to figure out the same things that the South Korean people did. How is it that I can stand in the middle of Times Square and yell out at the top of my lungs, fuck Joe Biden or fuck Donald Trump, and a cop standing, 3 feet away won't even look at me? They won't even budge. They couldn't care less, and it wouldn't matter. But I stand in the middle of Tiananmen Square and I yell out, fuck Xi Jin Ping, and the cop's 100 yards away, yeah, I'll never be heard from again in the rest of my life. And the rest of my life will be very short thereafter. So the Chinese people are going to start to understand all this. They're going to start to see what all these things mean for their children, their grandchildren. And it inevitably will start again with the students, because they're the most ferocious, they're the most angered, they're the most active, they have the most time. And eventually, after, I would guess probably, even maybe the movement might start before Xi Jinping dies, but after Xi Jinping dies, the movement will, explode and accelerate. And the reason why Tiananmen was not successful was mainly because the central government used the outside military force outside of Beijing to squash and quell the movement inside Beijing. Why'd that work? Well, because they told the army units from outside Beijing, the people that are protesting are your enemy. They're taking your life away. They're taking your money away. They're trying to suppress you. And that worked because not only was the difference between urban and rural incomes dramatic, still remains that way, but because the mass migration, yes, that had started in the early part of the 80s, didn't really get to its crescendo until probably the 1990s, when a humongous of influx of people started and continues to happen in China. So ultimately what's going to happen is when the democracy movement starts again, they're going to draw the sympathy and the ire of not just the students, but their parents, their relatives, their leaders, adult leaders, and other political faction. The typical response of the central government will be to bring in the army units. Again, from the outside, trying to, divide and conquer, if you would. This time, however, it is more than likely to fail. And the reason is because it's the same reason why it failed in Korea, and that's the same reason why it failed in Russia. They know each other. In other words, the people on one side of that barricade, the protesters, and the other side of the barricade, the militia and army units, they're going to know each other. There are going to be a lot of people that have cross-references, and they're going to say, well, I'm not going to shoot my friend. I'm not going to shoot my brother. I'm not going to shoot my sister, my aunt, my cousin, my uncle. And that's going to create a problem. And the army units are going to be like, nope, we'll be here, but we're not going to start killing people like we did in Tiananmen Square. And that's going to cause a problem. So the sergeant's going to go to the lieutenant and go, Lieutenant, if we try to get our soldiers to shoot the civilians, chances are we'll be the ones who get shot. The lieutenants go to the captain and say the same thing. The captain's going to go to the colonel and say the same thing. And the colonel's going to go to the generals and say the same thing. And ultimately the generals will be like, shit, I don't want to die. Okay, well, do we have a choice? And that's when the army is going to turn. Once the army turns, it's over for the central government. Over a long haul period, no army will ever completely decimate their own citizens. And the time will come when those things will happen. A, the income levels will be high enough across the entire Chinese landscape that people will start to think more of the future as opposed to the present. 2, this will trigger a lot of discourse and anger, and they're going to start with the students protesting against the government. This then will lead to the central government trying to quell the rebellion, and they'll start to bring in military units, and they'll start to realize the military isn't going to cooperate. And that's when the central government is going to have to cede something. Now, the reason why I think in particular, inside of 5 years of Xi Jinping dying, this is going to happen is because Xi Jinping has such a grip on Chinese politics right now. Basically, he's the tyrant and the king. Everybody serves him and his vision and his motivation. And there's a saying in Asia, it's the tighter you squeeze clay, the more the clay seeps out. And that's basically what's happening in China. Because he has such tight control, once he passes away, he will have created a numerous number of different factions that will be vying for power, one of which will be the democracy movement. And this democracy movement, in my opinion, will ultimately gain the upper hand. And therefore, China will turn into a democracy, or will begin the process of democratization inside of 5 years of Xi Jinping dying. The problem is this could lead to civil war. There's no question that the Xinjiang provinces in the West will definitely cede. They will create their own religious state, maybe not like Iran, but something similar to that. And then Mongolia will definitely have reestablished its full independence, and chances are Tibet will as well. That all being said, the biggest problem is between the coastal and the inner cities or the inland areas of China. The money is almost all concentrated in the coastal areas. Ultimately, the agricultural rural areas of China and the money centers of China, which is the cities, they're going to have to come to some sort of a compromise. And if I'm not mistaken, it will happen. But there is a chance that if it doesn't happen, we're looking at an all-out civil war in China. Again, my thinking is that it will not happen because both sides have too much to lose. Anyway, then the next issue will be North Korea. Right now, North Korea survives because China is its patron. But if China becomes a democracy, why is it going to care about North Korea anymore? So that would lead eventually to some sort of a North Korean collapse, in my opinion. And again, this is something I will address later. But the point is that China crashing and turning into a democracy will have ginormous consequences geopolitically, including its view of the US, and also including our view of China. And that will change dramatically to the point where maybe China is not our adversary anymore, economically or politically. And the thing that we're going to have to worry more than anything else isn't the battle between China and the US. In my opinion, the biggest thing we need to worry about is the battle between China and India. And in my opinion, I think longer term, India is more of a threat to us than China. I'm talking 50 plus years from now. And there's a reason why I'm saying that. And again, that's something I will address in the future. But the point is that the process for which China is going to go through a democratization has already begun. And the seeds have already been planted. And all it needs is a trigger. And that trigger, in my opinion, is the death of Xi Jinping, and then a power struggle ensuing, which will lead to the democratization of China. I appreciate you listening to me. I know this was a long video. Thank you for listening. If you like, please post a like and subscribe. Thank you and have a great day.